Irrigation is a necessity in many urban planting sites, especially those with newly planted trees. Water can be applied in the amounts desired and at appropriate times with irrigation systems. However, if drainage is inadequate or the irrigation water has a high level of soluble salts, root problems or high soil salinity, salt buildup, can occur. Tree health can be adversely affected by either overwatering or underwatering. Good water management programs need to consider the water requirements for different tree species, soil conditions, irrigation systems and scheduling, water conservation practices, and drainage. 1. Describe water availability and the movement of water in the soil. 2. Identify the effects of excess or insufficient water in the root zone. 3. Explain why irrigation is important in many urban landscape sites. 4. Compare and contrast the different methods of irrigation. 5. Define evapotranspiration, infiltration, and water holding capacity. 6. Explain why good drainage in the root zone of trees is important. 7. Discuss water conservation techniques. Various terms are used to describe both water retention and water loss. Water that drains through the soil is called gravitational water, while that which is retained is either capillary or hygroscopic water. Capillary water is held in the micropores of the soil and is generally available for plant uptake. Hygroscopic water is held too tightly by the soil for uptake by plants. Capillary water is also called available water, while hygroscopic water is called unavailable water. For many soils, approximately 1/2 of the water held after drainage is available, and the other half is unavailable. After gravitational water has drained, the soil is at field capacity containing both available and unavailable water. When the available water in the soil decreases to a point in which a plant cannot take up enough to replace the water lost through transpiration, the plant will wilt. If soil water diminishes to the point at which a plant cannot recover even if more water is applied, it is said to be at permanent wilting point. Permanent wilting point is highly variable and depends on how an individual plant interacts with the current soil and atmospheric conditions. Water holding capacity is the total amount of water held by a soil after drainage occurs, when it is at field capacity. Water holding capacity varies with soil texture, sand, silt, and clay content. Fine-textured soils, clays, have a greater water holding capacity than coarse-textured soils, sands. As a result, sandy soils will need to be irrigated for shorter periods, but more frequently than clay soils. Water moves downward, laterally, and sometimes upward in soils. Infiltration is the term used to describe water movement downward into the soil, while percolation describes water movement within the soil. In response to gravity, water moves downward faster and more extensively than it moves sideways. Both infiltration and percolation are affected by soil texture. Clay soils usually have much lower infiltration rates than sandy soils. Other factors that influence percolation and infiltration rates include soil structure and bulk density. Soils with poor structure, that is, compacted soils, will have lower infiltration and percolation rates than one of similar texture with good structure. In situations where the infiltration rate is low, water needs to be applied slowly and over extended periods of time. After rainfall or irrigation, some water is held in the soil and some drains from the soil. Water that drains through the soil is called gravitational water, while that which is retained is either capillary or hygroscopic water. Capillary water is also called available water, while hygroscopic water is called unavailable water. After gravitational water has drained, the soil is at field capacity, containing both available and unavailable water. When the available water in the soil decreases to a point in which a plant cannot take up enough to replace the water lost through transpiration, the plant will wilt. This graph is a representation of the relationship among gravitational water, available water, and unavailable water in soil. Note that the units on the vertical axis are in inches of water per foot of soil. According to this graph, the total water found in a foot of soil remains constant at 4 inches regardless of soil texture, sand, silt, or clay, as shown on the horizontal axis. While texture does not affect total water in this example, it does have a profound effect on the proportion of gravitational, available, and unavailable water found in the soil. The amount of water needed by plants varies with the species and size of the plant, soil conditions, air temperature, humidity, light levels, exposure, and wind movement over the leaves. Transpirational water loss from leaves is controlled by stomatal opening and closing and other anatomical adaptations in response to the environment. When transpirational water losses exceed the plant's ability to take up water from the soil, the plant wilts. In an extended period of water deficit, drought, plants respond by wilting, scorching, dropping leaves, and/or increasing the production of absorbing roots while reducing canopy growth. Severe drought periods can cause extensive root loss, leaf abscission, twig dieback, and plant death. Some plants utilize extensive root systems to survive in arid regions. These plants develop deep, spreading roots that allow them to make use of soil moisture over a large area and to tap into continuous water sources found deeper underground. By accessing this groundwater, trees and shrubs have more water available to survive. This adaptation is commonly associated with mesquite trees, Prosopis glandulosa. Other species have a different strategy for surviving periods of low soil moisture content. Some plants become virtually dormant during extended dry periods, for example, California buckeye, Aesculus californica. Small leaves provide a reduced surface area in which water can escape through transpiration. A waxy outer layer, cuticle, may further limit moisture loss to the air. Tiny leaf hairs, pubescence, prevent water loss by trapping an insulating layer of moist air near the leaf's surface. Similarly, sunken stomata are protected by a small pocket of stagnant air which collects in the depression. Trees that develop some of these adaptations include olive, Olea europaea, and salt cedar or tamarisk, Tamarix ramosissima. As mentioned earlier, species with relatively deep and extensive root systems have access to greater amounts of water than those with shallow root systems. Drought-tolerant plants not only are adapted to survive with minimal water, they can be adversely affected by supplemental irrigation water. Possible adverse effects include problems with root disease and shallow root development. Shallow rooting limits the volume of soil a tree utilizes for water uptake and exposes the plant to fluctuating soil moisture conditions. Trees that are accustomed to fairly regular rainfall throughout the summer may begin to show stress after several weeks without rain. For some tree species, wilting is common during hot summer afternoons, but if the leaves are not turgid, fully hydrated, again in the morning, the tree may be seriously stressed. Leaves may begin to turn brown or drop. If water is not added, smaller roots will begin to dry out and die, and the tree will decline. Trees growing where soil volume is limited, such as small parking lot islands or sidewalk tree pits and planters, often are the first to show water stress symptoms. Remember, if water loss from the foliage exceeds the rate at which it can be replaced via the vascular system, drought stress symptoms can develop. Trees growing in hot, dry, or windy locations can develop leaf scorch even if soil moisture is maintained at optimal levels. Also, anything that interferes with the vascular transport system can lead to drought-like symptoms. Girdling roots, lightning strike damage, trunk injury or cankers, vascular wilt disease, and similar disorders can all affect the uptake and transport of water throughout a tree's vascular system. Tree species that are not adapted to drought conditions or arid climates may need to be irrigated. Irrigation requirements vary with tree species and size and the site's environmental conditions, that is, soil texture and structure, sun exposure, wind, and humidity. The need for irrigation can be reduced or even eliminated if proper planning and plant selection are able to match the site's environmental conditions with the tree's water requirements. Usually, trees in windy, hot areas, such as in parking lots and or close to buildings, will require more water than those of the same species in shaded and or wind-protected areas. Newly transplanted trees of any species require frequent irrigation, especially within the root ball. However, watering established plants at the same rate as new transplants can lead to problems. When the amount of water required to establish or maintain a given plant species in a given site is determined, irrigation schedules, for automated systems, need to address watering duration, frequency, days on and off, cycle times, and distribution. As a general rule, frequent shallow waterings encourage surface rooting, which makes the tree more vulnerable to desiccation, drying out, during periods of drought. Infrequent, deep soakings can encourage the development of a deeper root system and more drought-tolerant trees. Some soils, especially those high in clay, can be improved by being allowed to dry out between irrigations. The natural shrinking and swelling of the soil can improve the soil structure and water infiltration rate. Conversely, frequent shallow irrigation may compact the soil surface and reduce the infiltration rate. It is often best to irrigate in the evening through early morning hours. This is particularly true for sprinkler irrigation systems because less water is lost through evaporation and more water is available to infiltrate the soil. Also, many municipalities have instituted water use regulations that limit use to evenings and early morning hours. In situations where foliar diseases are a problem, it is important to avoid irrigation systems that keep moisture and humidity around the leaves for extended periods of time. Water should be distributed uniformly to as much of the root system as possible. If only part of the root system can be watered, such as when hardscape covers the soil surface, supplying water to accessible parts of the root system is better than not irrigating. In any case, efforts should be made to keep the root collar dry between irrigations. Maintaining wet soil in contact with the lower trunk, root collar, can lead to infection by soil-borne pathogens.